Well, we're going to talk about some theories we have as to the question of why do we have so much out-of-field teaching. Our sense is that most of the research is on how much there is and how to deal with it and whatnot, but we want to back up a little bit. Why is it so prevalent, particularly in countries like the US, to begin with? I was going to start with a little bit of biography. I'm a former secondary school, high school teacher, and I was taken aback when I first started teaching that never a semester went by in which, in addition to social studies courses, that was my main field, I wasn't also assigned to teach things like math and special education and sex education and topics I wasn't prepared to teach. And one thing that struck me was that this was clearly business as usual. The principals did this, and they didn't see as a problem that a social studies teacher is assigned to teach 10th grade algebra, for instance, in my case. And that really struck me that, okay, so this is the way schools operate. And I saw it as a big problem. In any event, I eventually quit, went and got a PhD in sociology, and have been studying teachers in schools ever since. I'm going to talk a little bit about research that we've done in the past on out-of-field teaching, and then go back to this question of why is it so prevalent? Now, just to give an example, here's the kinds of things we found in the United States. And that's a big question that I'm mostly going to be entirely talking about the United States context, and it's curious how much of our theory might apply in other countries. And maybe we can bring that during the question and answer time. But the point is that it's prevalent and widespread. In this case, it's what percentage of teachers at the secondary level are teaching things where they don't have a regular state license or certificate. One point to notice here is that it's not higher in mathematics and science than it is in other fields, even though those are shortage fields. Another typical level we found is this, where it's not looking certification, it's looking at how many don't even have a college minor or a major. Their degree isn't in it, but they also don't have this lesser level called a college minor in the US. And again, it's high levels, it's prevalent, and it's just as prevalent in fields like social studies and English as it is in math and science. So it was good that when data like this started coming out in the States, some awareness of this problem happened, and it came to people's attention, and it came to policymakers' attention. And that was to the good, in my view, as a former high school teacher. But there was a big problem I have always felt, which is that why this is going on has been misunderstood. And so I'd like to review a couple of the most popular explanations as to the why question, and then propose our own alternative explanation. So in the US, the most dominant, or amongst the most dominant views is that the problem of out-of-field teaching is from one or two different sources. One of them is that the education of teachers isn't very good, or that the state issued standards for licensure and certification aren't very good. And especially there has always been a lot of criticism that this is because teachers' preparation and licensure doesn't include much subject matter preparation, too much pedagogy. And there's sort of severe critics that talk about teacher education programs in the States are top heavy on how to teach and light heavy or unheavy in the subject matter. So now there's clearly truth that teacher preparation education in the States is often very weak. It's very mixed quality. That's a long-standing issue, highly recognized. But this view that it's inadequate teacher preparation, it confounds two different things. There's what your training education is before you teach, pre-service, and then there's what you're assigned to teach once you're on the job. And this explanation kind of confounds the two. These are two different problems. The source of out-of-field teaching isn't that you lack education and preparation. I mean, over 90% of teachers have a regular state license in the US. They all have a college degree. Half of them have master's, graduate level degrees in some field. The problem isn't a lack of education, it's a lack of fit between what they're educated in and what they're asked to do once on the job. And so hence, upgrading the standards for education, that may be a great thing to do. It's not going to solve this problem. Which brings us to, why is there such a lack of fit going on? And that's the second one here, is the main theory is that, well, there's shortages. Schools simply can't find who they need to hire, and so they have to make do. They have to put a square peg in a round hole. Voila, out-of-field teaching. Now, the data show us in the US there clearly have been shortages. Student enrollments have gone up over the last several decades. There has been an aging of the teaching force, and significant number of schools report that they have trouble filling their positions. We know that. There's shortages out there. But there's two problems with this theory that shortages are the main thing behind out-of-field teaching assignments. One is, and I mentioned this earlier, that there's as much out-of-field teaching in surplus fields, English and social studies, as there are in shortage fields, math and science. So shortages can't really explain the large levels, high levels of out-of-field teaching in English and social studies. The second problem with this second view here, this inadequate teacher supply, is that the data show us that there's large numbers of schools which report that they have no shortages. And that's true in the US. Shortages are not across all schools, but they still have out-of-field teaching. So again, it undermines it. Shortages are clearly an issue, and they're certainly a factor behind out-of-field teaching, but they can't fully explain it because it happens in surplus fields, because it happens in schools without shortages. And hence, so the solution, recruit thousands of new teachers, and we have lots of initiatives like this in the US. Those might be fine to do, but they're not going to solve the problem if large numbers of these people, once on the job, are misassigned what they're teaching. So this brings us to our hypothesis as to why there's so much out-of-field teaching. And this is a sociological perspective that Hannah and I are working on, writing on now. And our argument is that out-of-field teaching is really rooted in two aspects of the context of schools. One is how schools are organized, their organizational structure. And the second is the status of teaching as an occupation. So it has to do with organizational structure, and it has to do with the occupational status. And this is the two main elements of our sociological explanation here. So first, schools highly centralized. In the US, when the public school system was founded, quite intentionally it adopted an industrial model of organization, the boss worker model. And the idea is that management makes decisions and employees do what they're told. That's maybe a little blunt, but that's pretty much the gist of it. It was a top-down command model. In the case here, principals, and the data show this, they mainly make the decisions in schools, and teachers do not have much input or voice in the US. And this gets to the very specific decision of who decides who teaches what. That's a key decision in any building. And it turns out teachers have little input to that. The principal decides it. The principal, their context is increasing demands of what to offer in the school. That's been a century-long thing we ask more and more of schools, with a limited part of the day, limited part of the year, limited teaching staff. In that context, our hypothesis is that out-of-field teaching shouldn't actually be that much of a surprise, that often principals sort of have to make do with what they have. And they're allowed to because there's little regulation. There's all kinds of regulations teachers need to be certified. But how schools operate internally, that's not regulated in the US. Now, just to give an example of who makes the decisions, this is national data, and it's reports from principals, and it's three key decisions. Who's involved, who controls, who has a lot of influence over evaluating teachers in schools, who has a lot of influence over hiring teachers, and who decides that bottom set of bars, who makes the teacher assignments. In each case, we see that the black bar, that's the principals, they're overwhelmingly make these decisions. The teachers are the yellow bars, and I mean, in the case of deciding teacher assignments, less than a fifth of the schools in the country, the teachers have much influence over that. These kind of data, that schools are top-down places. Teachers don't have a lot of voice. And the idea is that this is a factor that can lead to more out-of-field teaching assignments. So this brings us to the second element of our hypothesis, our sociological perspective. That teaching is it's what's called by sociologists a semi-profession in the US. It simply doesn't have the status of doctors, lawyers, professors, engineers, dentists. It doesn't have the occupational status that those groups have. And the basis of status from a sociological perspective is how complex and sophisticated and intellectually oriented is a job, is a type of work. And the idea is that doctors and lawyers, etc., theirs is highly complex work. It requires a lot of skill, knowledge, training, expertise, and therefore it has a lot of specialization. And the argument here is that in the US, teaching's just not viewed as that complex and sophisticated, and hence the assumption is it doesn't take that kind of knowledge and training and expertise and specialization. In plain terms, few would require cardiologists, heart doctors to deliver babies. Few would require real estate lawyers to defend criminal cases. Few would require chemical engineers to design bridges. The idea is that these are the knowledge-based types of work. You wouldn't do that. Whereas my experience was, no one really thought it was a problem to have a social studies teacher teach algebra. This slide simply shows occupational status prestige ratings in the US. I hope the font isn't too small. And it's a national survey done. They did done every few years. And on the upper left corner, we have physicians, doctors. So in the United States, doctors are the pinnacle prestige line of work. That's declined a little in recent years. And just below them, lawyers, professors, architects, chemists, chemical engineers, dentists, etc. Those are the high status, formerly male-dominated lines of work. Now we see in that middle vertical panel, false teachers. Teachers are not the lowest status work occupational group in the US. They're in the middle. They're a semi-profession. It's interesting also, there's a hierarchy within teaching. Secondary teachers have a little more status than elementary school teachers, have a little more status than pre-K and kindergarten teachers. And then below them, we have other, notice, female-dominated lines of work, librarians, social workers, nurses, etc., those are below status. Actually, nurses are a little higher than teachers. So our argument here is that behind out-of-field teaching, there's these how schools are organized is a big factor. How teachers are treated as an occupational group, as semi-professionals. That in that context, misassignment by principals of teachers is acceptable, it's normal, it's less expensive, it's more efficient than the alternatives. That context matters. It's not that shortages don't count, and it's not that sometimes the preparation of teachers isn't abysmal. That's true, but context also matters, and that while it might be very normal to do these things, they're not cost-free. So I will stop there, and we'll see if we have any questions.